Good evening. I'm Stephen Pugnani. I'm head of marketing here at the Institute of Science. Thank you for coming tonight. A couple items before we begin. For those of you who may be interested, the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research is doing another lecture this Sunday. Architectural historian Eric Hill will be discussing the many faces of Albert Kahn. That is at 4 p.m. in DeSalle Auditorium. Tickets at the door. If you're at all interested in architecture, it's a great chance to delve into the work of Kahn. They'll be discussing Cranbrook House, obviously, and they'll move from there. Also tonight, we're happy to have with us the Organization for Bat Conservation. I know you all just enjoyed hearing Rob speak. We hope you enjoyed meeting some of the bats. Usually people do. They're based here at Cranbrook, and they work across the country to inspire people to protect biodiversity. It's a very important organization. We're very proud to be affiliated with them. They were most recently at the White House for the Easter egg roll. I don't know if Rob mentioned that, but that was quite a coup for them. So very, very nice press on that. For more information about the organization, visit their website at batconservation.org, and Rob will be here afterwards. So if you have any questions or want to see more bats, they will be here. Special thanks to Michigan Radio, as always, for their in-kind support of this program. We greatly appreciate it, and hope they'll continue to support us. It's a pleasure tonight to welcome back our speaker tonight back to the Institute of Science. Dr. Patrick Doran was here in 2012 when he discussed climate change. That's a great chance to remind you all that these lectures are archived on our YouTube webpage, our YouTube channel. So please take a chance to check through those to see which ones you may have missed. They're all there. As Director of Conservation for Michigan, Patrick leads statewide and Great Lakes-wide investigations of conservation priorities. This includes the identification and prioritization of important conservation areas, including, I assume, the wild places he's going to discuss tonight, as well as the development and implementation of conservation strategies and measures for success. Patrick earned his doctorate from Dartmouth College, where he studied the causes and consequences of spatial variation in the distribution and abundance of forest-breeding songbirds at the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Patrick received dual master's degrees in ecology and environmental science from Indiana University, where he studied the effects of forest fragmentation on the breeding success of forest-dependent birds. He received his undergraduate education at Villanova University. He's also held positions as a habitat biologist with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as senior ecologist and GIS analyst with the Wildland Project. Patrick, welcome back to the Institute.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be back here. I didn't realize it was 2012 that we were here last time. Wow, I was just a kid. Now, has anyone not been to one of these lectures? Anybody new to the lectures here? We have one person new? So everybody's been to a couple. Okay, this is not going to be like the other ones. The other ones, I'm going to show lots of awesomely wonderful, beautiful pictures of wild places in Michigan. I'm going to go light on the science. I usually go a little heavier on the science, but I'm going to go a little bit light on the science, and we're going to have fun. I'm going to tell you about some absolutely beautiful places and what is really wild. Last summer, I had the opportunity to visit Alaska. And it was a once-in-a-lifetime trip. My family, I have two young ones, got to go. And I have in my mind, as an ecologist, as a conservation biologist, this picture of Alaska, right? And the places you haven't been, you hold up there in your mind about what it's going to be like, what wilderness is like. And we had a beautiful day. This is a picture I got to take of Denali, right? Denali, you only see 30% of the time. We had a day that looked like this. And I got there, and I was there. I said, this is the tundra. This is the tundra I've been reading about and studying about all through my ecology classes, right? These are the mountains. This is the Great North, and it was amazing. We got to visit this glacier, which is in the Northwest Fjord around from Seward. It was about a 4-hour boat ride. And we got to this very wild place, the boat captain, it was a small kind of boat, like a whaling boat, but it was a smaller one. He said, well, there's been about 500,000 people here, visitors here, ever. He didn't mean that year. He didn't mean on his boat. He meant there's been about 500,000 tourists here ever. That's a wild place. right? That's pretty wild. I mean, there's been native peoples there for many, many, many thousands of years, but tourists, there's been about 500,000. You probably passed, I know I drove from Ann Arbor to here. I think I passed 500,000 people. I waited behind about 500,000 people. I also, very lucky with the Nature Conservancy, I got to visit Lake Tanganyika in Tanzania this year, and that was wild. That was wild. This is a palm nut vulture that flew by the boat we were on. This is beyond the roads. You have to go by boat to get on places. I have a bat picture, which I don't think you could identify, but maybe you could. You know, this is the sunset over Lake Tanganyika. I didn't see a plane for the 3 days I was at this place. I didn't really see, I think I saw one motorboat. This looks like a sunset you'd see over our Great Lakes, and the lakes are very similar to our lakes, but it's wild. This is as wild as it can get. Unmanaged, unmanipulated. That's sunsetting over the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is an incredibly wild place in many ways, not just naturally wild. But these are wild places. But my contention to you, and my challenge to you tonight is you can find this wilderness, the wilderness and the wildness I found in Alaska, the wilderness I found in my trip a couple months ago to Tanzania. You can find that right here in this place. It may be smaller. It may come in a different form. This is, any birders in the audience? Anybody? This is an online program called eBird that Cornell has established. So whenever a birder goes out, they can jot down every species they saw and how many of that and what location they were in, the time birding. They enter this. It's kind of a collective of data. People can go online and enter. This is a checklist I got for a park that's just about 5 miles from here. People go birding in this park and they take notes of what birds they've seen and they enter it into this database. This park right up here had a list of about 150 species people had seen there. What's wild is I take a species I circled down there called black-polled warbler. This is the female of the species. This warbler, which you can see right here, maybe in a couple more weeks than when they start migrating through, takes one of the world's greatest migrations of any species in the whole world. This species that you can see here, I mean, you could probably walk out there, probably flying through here in a couple weeks. This is the male of the species. It makes a migration. It breeds. I'm going to step away just a second. It breeds up there in the boreal forest. It'll come down a little bit into New Hampshire, where I saw some during my graduate years. But its migration south leaves from the east coast and makes one contiguous migration down to its wintering grounds here. That little bird, you know how much that bird weighs? It weighs, you put 3 nickels in your hand. That's how much that bird weighs, 9 ounces. And that bird can fly that route nonstop. That's wild. And you will see that bird, again, you can see that bird in your backyard. I had one in my backyard in Hazlet, Michigan a couple years ago, and that was neat. I heard that song, I knew it from the mountains of New Hampshire, and it came to my backyard. That bird that spent its winter down here stopped by my garden Hazlet on its way to the great North Woods. So that wilderness, that's just as wild as a palm nut vulture or a sunset over the Democratic Republic of Congo or seeing Denali on a beautiful summer day. It's just as wild. So I'm going to take you to some wild places in Michigan now that are just rival those ones that we see around the world. That's one of my favorite birds. It's beautiful. It looks like a chickadee a little bit, but it's beautiful. Again, I'm with the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a global organization. We have a mission of the Nature Conservancy to conserve the lands and waters in which all life depends, not just the natural world, but which people get services from as well. We envision a world where the diversity of life thrives, and people act to conserve nature for its own sake and for the ability that nature provides to people, the services that we get from nature. We have places, I'm just showing North America. We're active in all 50 states in North America and over 30 countries around the world. We're the largest conservation organization. In North America, we have some priority places we work in. One is our Great Lakes region. Across the Great Lakes, we have an extensive history of land conservation activities. All these dots on the map are land acquisition and protection activities. So taking a piece of land and putting it into permanent conservation, either done by us or done in partnership where we partnered with another organization, another private organization, or a federal or state organization. We don't own all these things. Sometimes we have been involved in transferring them to another long-time owner, but some of these are preserves. So I'm going to take you to a few of these around the state of Michigan. One thing, however, I want you to realize as I take you to some of these wild places is that we can protect these places. We can put it into protection means some legal arrangement that means it is nature in perpetuity. And we can protect these places, but we need to do so much more. We can't just protect them and not think about them. We have to maintain them. We have to care for them. We have to steward them. We have to think about what's going on within the boundaries of those protected areas, and we have to think what's going on adjacent areas, and we have to think what's going on regionally and nationally and globally, like climate change affects our protected areas. This is a paper that analysis I did with a faculty member at Michigan State University showing that land adjacent to protected areas gets developed at a higher rate than land not adjacent to a protected area. So think about that. People are attracted to protect areas. That's where they want to build their homes. That's where they are close to nature. So that's what the graphs show is the conversion rate from a natural state to a developed state. So if you have a high rate, it means there's a high rate of conversion from natural to developed. Near protected areas, which is the blue, and just kind of generically across the state, which is orange. So it means the conversion rate is sometimes 2 times for certain habitat types, is double adjacent to the protected areas than it is kind of at random around the state. So we have an impact to these protected areas coming from without their boundaries and within. So even though we can protect these places, we have to think about the world around them. We have to think about how we develop areas. We have to think about how we manage forests. We have to think about how we manage agriculture, because the management of those all impacts the nature we seek to protect. And we all ultimately have to think about climate change, because that's an ultimate thing that will happen over long, long terms that will impact the health of our protected areas. Maybe make them more healthy, maybe make them less healthy, but it's something we have to think about as we go about doing conservation like an organization like the Nature Conservancy. All right, so within the state of Michigan, we really protect our iconic places, our iconic forests, our coastline, which rivals that in length of the East Coast. We have to protect our water resources, the greatest water resources. Our Great Lakes are 20% of the world's fresh water. I got to visit Tanganyika, and that's 17% of the world's fresh water in that lake alone. That lake is as big as Michigan plus Huron plus Superior. But we have that water right here, too. We also work on policies and practices for forestry, for agriculture, for fisheries and coastal and urban and invasive species, and as information management and the science that supports those. So again, even though we can think about some of those places, we have to work in systems across the state, human-dominated systems, systems that are productive for our agriculture and our forest products around the state as well, to ensure the conservation of all these things. I can't see you guys, it's so dark out there. I'll just pretend I'm, okay. So I'm going to take you around the state. One thing I want you to know is behind these beautiful places that I'm going to show you. Oh, that's better, thank you. Behind these beautiful places I'm going to show you is we have wonderful people I work with. I have a staff of about 30 conservation professionals, and they really think hard daily about the strategies they're employing in places, the activities, the actions they're employing in places to get their work done. So every place on the coastal, like that big red blob along our fabulous dunes, has a set of actions and the strategies that my staff work on every day to do the conservation. We work on our northern forests, both some specific places that are outlined, but the green is the forest cover across the whole state of Michigan, and our forestry work impacts everything that's in green, whether that's state or federal or private ownership. We work on major aquatic systems like Saginaw Bay watershed and our Western Lake Erie and our Grand Traverse Bay. I'll show you some examples from those. But I'm going to dive now into some awesome pictures. That's the background. That's about as science-y as I'm going to get, maybe a little bit more because I can't help it sometimes. An alvar. This is the first habitat type I want to introduce. This is a great Scrabble word for those who play Scrabble. You need to get rid of the V's, which are really hard to get rid of. What's an alvar? An alvar we find up in Michigan in these light green areas. An alvar is an ecosystem based on limestone plain with thin or no soil. And thin, I mean like centimeters, not inches, like thin or no soil. As a result, it's really sparsely vegetated, but it often is flooded in the spring and is affected by drought, like naturally affected by floods and drought. That's adapted to that system. And it has a really distinctive grouping of prairie-like plants. The neat thing is, you don't think of prairie-like plants up here, right? And so it's kind of disjunct. It's a different kind of place. Because of the system there, it brings in these prairie plants that you usually find much further south than those. This is the distribution. This is a map that Nature Conservancy did many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, showing the distribution of very specific places that have alvars across the northern Great Lakes. You'll notice there's a pattern here. This whole area is all kind of the Niagara Escarpment. It's a geological feature that Niagara Falls is made out of, right here, and that goes all along, all the way over across the Lake Chanel Islands, over to Green Bay. And the Niagara Escarpment makes that feature, and that's made out of limestone, where the limestone is coming to the surface. I'm going to take you to this place out here on Drummond Island and show you some beautiful pictures. This is our preserve, our Maxton Plains Preserve in Drummond Island. Anyone been there? I have not been there yet. Oh, wonderful. You guys can probably tell me the story. And you can kind of see a little bit of sparse vegetation. You see open areas. And this is what the landscape looks like along the coasts. Again, you'll see the limestone rocks there, some vegetation, some not. It's a very dynamic landscape. You'll see low-growing vegetation, low-growing plants there, and then these beautiful prairies up there where you wouldn't expect to see them in the middle of the forest. It's going to flip through some pictures. You actually see some deer browse in the background on those trees there. A nice strong line of no vegetation about yay high. A little bit of deer browse there in some of these places. See a lot of the prairie plants. You guys know the plants better than I. I'm a bird guy, as you heard from my introduction there. But a lot of the same plants we see down here. So Great Lakes dunes. The Great Lakes region is home to the largest collection of freshwater dunes in the world. So that's a neat stat right there. You can't go any place and see dunes like you can, these freshwater dune systems like you can in Michigan. 250,000 acres of dunes in Michigan alone. It's iconic for Michigan. I'm going to take you to some of our dune preserves here along the Lake Michigan coast. This is our Zetterberg Preserve at Point Betsy. Some people have been there. I've been here. It's one of my favorite places. Very beautiful. So the landscape, these are very wind-driven systems. These are very disturbance-driven systems. They rely upon the wind. They rely upon the snow and the ice and the formation. They change from day to day to season to season. The dunes are really never in the same place. They're vast landscapes. They can reach 500 feet high coming out to the lake. I had some folks that were visiting from other Nature Conservancy colleagues that were visiting from other places, and some had never been to the Great Lakes. And we climbed across the dunes, and actually I pointed the other way to Glen Lake, which I think is the other way here. And I said, oh, there's Lake Michigan. And they were like, wow, that's beautiful. No, I said, no, turn around. So there's Lake Michigan. And they were just like, wow, they've never seen water like that atop these beautiful high dunes. You have these natural blowouts in the dunes, depending upon, again, disturbance or a wind-driven system, and just these gorgeous, gorgeous landscapes. Some species, this is a Pitcher's thistle. This is an endangered species that we say here in Michigan, that we try to do a lot of conservation for. And one of my favorite birds, anyone? Piping plovers. So this is, again, another endangered species that's actually doing pretty good in recent years in Michigan, but there's not that much habitat. You see a juvenile on the left side there, and you see it's got some bands on its legs. So sometimes when they hatch, most of the nests are found and monitored, and they can band the babies with a unique identification of bands, a unique color combination, so you can identify individuals. It also has this silver band. Whenever you band a bird, you have a silver band with a unique ID. So if that bird's ever caught again, you can figure out where it was born and when it was born and where it's from. And sometimes I actually get out to Florida in the winter and I can spot these guys on the winter down there. I don't necessarily know who they are, but I can mark down the band combination and I send it into the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they can use that as another point location. But the dunes are wonderful because it's not just the nature they provide, the recreational aspects. Everybody has a picture of them or their kids or their grandparents or mom and dad running down the dunes. I have a video of my mom and dad in the 70s running down Sleeping Bear Dune when I got to visit here from Ohio when I was a little kid. This is from Good Morning America. Sleeping Bear Dunes, named as one of the top visiting locations in the states to come to. These are economic drivers, right? They're recreational drivers. It gives us a sense of place. This is one of my kids' favorite places to go in Michigan, and that nature is a draw. It's giving us something spiritually, mentally, recreationally, and it's providing that nature. This is one of the most wonderful wild places in Michigan. However, there's a problem with some of our dunes. Baby's breath, wonderful in our floral arrangements, wonderful to give to our sweethearts, but baby's breath sometimes escapes cultivation and it ends up in our dune systems. This is a baby's breath plant, and this is actually, that's probably almost true life size of it, that big. And that'll set out millions of seeds. And those seeds, it breaks off like a tumbleweed in the fall when it senesces, when it dies, and it blows around and all those millions of seeds get dispersed. It comes from the Mediterranean. It loves sandy, sparse systems. But the thing what baby's breath does is it stabilizes the dune. You remember I said the dunes relied on disturbance. They are adapted, and the species that live there are adapted to change from year to year, from season to season. When you get baby's breath, all of this gray is baby's breath, and that tends to stabilize the dune, and it ultimately changes the dune system. So it's not habitat for pitcher thistle. The dunes near the water are not habitat for piping plover. And so we work to eradicate baby's breath from some of these dune systems. It sends down a taproot that can be 12 feet deep, that thick, to get the water, and that's what stabilizes our systems. It gets in the back dunes and changes, and we are working partly funded by the Meyer stores to effectively eliminate baby's breath across multiple locations. And it's not just the Nature Conservancy, it's us working with all the land conservancies up and down the coast there, working with the state lands and the federal lands to work on baby's breath. And so this is our Zetterberg Preserve before. This all in the foreground is baby's breath, all of this stuff here. And after our folks have removed baby's breath, this is a much more natural looking system. This is what the system should look like. And again, this changes from time to time, and all those are native plants that you see. So that's our dunes. That's one of my favorite things and favorite wild places in Michigan. We also here have a luxury of forests in this state. We have the biggest state forest system on the eastern half of the country. You have to go out west to some of our major forested states before you see more acres in our state forest system. We have 19 million acres of forest cover in Michigan. The forest product industry represents over 150,000 jobs in this state alone. So this system, billions of dollars of economic activities rely upon the system. I'm going to take you up to some of our places in the Upper Peninsula, our Two-Hearted Forest Preserve, which I hope some of you have been to, another absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous place. You know, you see landscapes and you see vistas like this in the wintertime. You see creatures like that. I think that's a moose. And this is up in the Keweenaw Peninsula where you can see forever. You know, I'm not sure that picture looks any less spectacular than Denali, to me. You can be in these forests and experience the solitude. You can be in these forests and see species like the black-pole warbler that have migrated 200 or 2,000, 3,000 miles to get there and raise their young. Fall of the year is an absolutely, absolutely wonderful and peaceful time. And again, you can get that value, the wildness value here, the aesthetics, the scenery, the sense of place, the spiritual meaning to yourself when you go in these places. I mentioned this is one species I studied when I was a graduate student. Anyone this one? Black-throated blue warbler. This is a beautiful bird. I mean, it's blue and it's black and black throat and this white wing patch. The older the males get, the bigger their wing patch gets, and the females like that. I don't know if it looks like muscles on them or something, but they find that very attractive, let's say. So the older you come across a young male, it's like 1 year old, and that little, it won't even be a spot sometimes. But a big male that's strong and been around and can defend his territory, has a big white spot, and the females just really like that. But this is a map of bird species diversity. The darkest colors, the blacks along here, are 80 to 100 species that breed in those places. If you go across the North Woods in our Great Lakes region, there's 80 to 100 species, different species that breed in those places. Some of the greatest bird diversity in the United States is right here. The greatest diversity of warblers like this one, colorful, beautiful warblers, is in these North Woods, and across the world. That's wild. That's the wilderness that we have in our place. That's, you know, I went to, when we did go to Alaska, we went in August when all the birds were left. I went on hikes that were 10 miles long, and I saw 2 birds, which was really terrible. I was really disappointed, but it was still beautiful. But again, the values, just like those dunes, these forests provide values. We harvest on our two-hearted preserve, or our two-hearted reserve. We have areas where we do harvest. And we harvest for a couple reasons. One is to restore the landscape, because when we purchased it, it had been harvested and managed for sugar maple over many, many years. So the stand, if you walk into a stand, it wouldn't look like those pictures. It would look like it's all sugar maple. 90% of the trees are sugar maple, and they're all 40 years old. So all the same height, all about the same size. We call it a diameter, at breast height, DBH. All the same size, a little bit of understory, but not much. It was just a monoculture. You might as well walk into a cornfield. Maybe not. That might be a little exaggeration. But we can manage that forest to get diversity back into it. Not just diversity of tree species, excuse me, but also the diversity of structure. You want tall trees. You want short trees. You want big trees. You want little trees. You want living trees. You want dead trees. You want standing trees. You want trees that are lying on the ground. Because all those different things keep the forest resilient to change, and they provide habitats and niches for all those species. I'm just going to skip. So we work on these forests, both the management of our lands, but not just the management of our lands. We produce timber, and we sell that timber locally to keep jobs and keep the value of those forests going to those places, and we use that harvest to restore that forest. And we want to teach other people these lessons about how you can do that sustainable forestry, promote biodiversity, and also have an economic benefit. So we don't just want to do that on lands. Part of our strategy is to tell others those stories and work with the state or the federal lands on that type of management of their lands. One of my other favorite places, especially in the fall, are our prairie fens, the type of wetland. It's a wetland community dominated by sedges, grasses, and other graminoids that occur moderately alkaline organic soil, and marl, another great Scrabble word, marl, south of the climate tension zone in the southern lower Michigan. Huge. And a lot of times it's where groundwater is bubbling to the surface through these calcareous soils. And because of that unique chemistry to it, and the groundwater tends to be stable in a certain temperature, again, you get some really unique plants. Again, this is a map from the state of Michigan, Michigan Natural Features Inventory, and our prairie fens occur along these places. What's neat geologically is you have these two fingers that kind of stick up into Michigan. These are called the interlobate region. And interlobate is where 2 glaciers were side by side, and as they receded, the dirt in the hills collected where they were receding and left these kind of hilly areas, right? You drive outside Ann Arbor, you start to see the hills and start to see the little lakes. And again, you get over here, near Kalamazoo is that same thing. You start to see a little relief in the landscape as opposed to where we live in Lansing and things like that. And there you get these, the groundwater bubbling to the surface, sometimes where the soil is shallow, and you also have the hills where the sand and soil, the rocky areas are deposited. I'm going to take you down here to our Grand River Fen Preserve. This is one of my favorite preserves that the Nature Conservancy owns. And you can get out here in any time of the year, and you can be 100 meters from the road, 100 meters from somebody's house. Not that far, but you just step off the road just a little bit, and you're in a completely different place. Michigan's only rattlesnake is in these places. Massasauga rattlesnake, which isn't much bigger. You can hold it in the palm of your hand. This isn't that big. This guy looks big, but you can kind of hold it in the palm of your hand. Mitchell satyr butterfly is about the size of a quarter. Mitchell satyr butterfly only occurs at, well, it's about a dozen places in the world. All those places are prairie fens in northern Indiana and southern Michigan. There's only 12 populations of it in the world. The largest one is on our Grand River Fen. Please don't call anybody that. We're a butterfly collector's office. It's the size of a quarter. The problem with these butterflies is they don't fly very well. They're not like monarchs that can fly great distances or fly across Great Lake. They can fly from about here to about there. And so the problem is that we fragment their landscape with roads or homes. They really can't disperse very well to the next 10. Highly endangered species. And we have the greatest population on one of the places that we have protected. That's why rattlesnakes and crazy butterflies. I was going to show a video now of, just to break it up so I can get a drink of water, of some management at our Ives Road Fen Preserve, which is down near Tecumseh, Michigan. And so I'm going to show you a short, I think it's about 6-minute video to talk about the special, the special aspects of some of these places and the dedication of some of our volunteers in terms of protecting their wilderness.
It's sunrise on the side of Raisin Center Highway in Tecumseh, Michigan, less than an hour's drive from Detroit. Morning commuters make their way to work, unaware of the rare ecosystem just down the hill, where a hidden wilderness is thriving and nature's dramas unfold every day. This common yellowthroat scours tangled vegetation in search of insects to take back to its nest. The chicks will have a hearty breakfast this morning. A white-tailed deer stirs up some resting red-winged blackbirds, but there are no hard feelings. On the ground, carnivorous plants receive their nutrients, not from the soil, but from insects they trap. This pitcher plant's slippery hairs cause unsuspecting insects to slip into a pool of digestive enzymes, where they're converted into nitrogen for nourishment. All this is happening on the 700 acres of the Ives Road Fen Nature Preserve. Everywhere you look at Ives, life is thriving, and this is possible because of the work of people like Chuck Pearson. Chuck has logged more than 10,000 hours volunteering to restore wildlife at Ives.
I do that partly to preserve it for other people and future generations. Partly, I like the exercise is good for me, keeps me fit. I get to meet people. I get to see interesting plants and animals. I get a sense of accomplishment.
After retiring from his job as an engineer at Ford, hardly a day has gone by that Chuck hasn't done something to help improve this nature preserve. Every Saturday, he's joined by a group of volunteers that share his passion, getting their hands dirty to restore a rare and beautiful place.
I mean, yes, you sweat and you complain and you're exhausted at the end of the day, but at the same time, you have a real feeling of accomplishment. And I like the people I work with. We joke around with one another. We look forward to seeing one another. It's actually a lot of fun.
This week, the volunteers were working to restore an upland prairie, but most of the work is focused on preserving the rare and vulnerable habitat that gives the preserve its namesake, the prairie fen. The history of this landscape is written in the chemistry of the groundwater. It's percolating up through limestone substrate deposited by glaciers at the end of the last ice age. The limestone makes the water flowing through it rich in calcium and low in acidity, or alkaline. It's this alkaline groundwater that makes this wetland prairie a fen.
Fens are globally rare wetland communities. They've generally been heavily impacted by human disturbance over time, so there aren't that many around. They're very unique, and they have high plant diversity and animal diversity, so they're just very diverse and unique communities that we want to protect.
Chris May manages preserves all over the Great Lakes state for the Nature Conservancy. One of his greatest responsibilities is dealing with plants and animals that don't belong in North America.
One of the biggest threats to Our preserves across the state, and Ives Road Fen in particular, are invasive plant species. They're a problem because they form what we call monocultures in some cases, and so there's nothing growing in that area except a particular species that's from another part of the world.
At Ives, the main culprit is a plant called glossy buckthorn. After it was imported from Eurasia, it spread prolifically. Without intervention of conservationists, this fen wouldn't exist as a diverse wildlife sanctuary. Instead, it would be a field of nothing but glossy buckthorn, providing neither food nor habitat for the many life forms thriving here, including a number of rare and endangered species. This untreated stand of buckthorn shows the contrast between plant diversity and what the fen would look like without restoration.
When we acquired Ives Road Fen, there were about 5 or 10 acres of prairie fen on the preserve, and we've expanded that to almost 100 acres through our restoration practices. So restoration is really a way to bring back the wildness to these historically diverse communities.
I will admit, when I first came down here, there were so many invasive species all over the fen that I thought we were engaging in exercise in futility, that it was a feel-good project, but we'd never cut it faster than it grew back. But over time, we started making headway. We saw the native plants come back, and it's just a real feeling of accomplishment.
This is the last remaining patch of mature buckthorn at Ives. Once removed, this fen will once again exist as it did before European settlement. About 70 miles away in the Shiawassee River water.
I'm going to stop there. That's a neat story. And both kind of the dedication of these people that spend their time, 10,000 hours, right? That makes you an expert according to Malcolm Gladwell, is that right? 10,000 hours on something. Chuck is absolutely an expert on the conservation of these places. Let me flip back to some of my slides. So next, I want to take you to some of the coastal wetlands we have around the Great Lakes. These are over 3,000 miles of shoreline. Places like the Western Lake Erie have lost 95% of the wetlands that traditionally existed in this place. Again, not all bad, right? We drain some of those wetlands because it can be the most highly productive agricultural landscape. So we have made some trade-offs, but sometimes we dipped a little too far into losing some of our wetlands because wetlands provide incredible services to society that we also still need. Lost my clicker, there we go. So I'm going to take you up to our Grass Bay Preserve and our Erie Marsh Preserve. These neat landscapes. What's cool about this picture is, again, this system is adapted to changing lake levels. Sometimes our lake levels are high in some years and sometimes they're low in other years. That's natural. That's what lake levels do. And so you see sometimes the water might be all the way up near the trees there, and sometimes it might go out another 100 meters. But species that live here and thrive here need that change. They need that disturbance to be able to reproduce. And you see these coastal wetlands that are home to all kinds of migratory species and resident species like this great blue heron down here at the bottom. American lotus at our Erie Marsh Preserve has incredible historical significance. Dwarf lake iris, another endangered species in the Great Lakes, grows about yay high, but in the springtime you see this carpet of blue on the bottom. Right now, we're in the middle of a major restoration at Erie Marsh. It's going to be a multi-million-dollar restoration to recreate some of the natural variation of this restoration. We're improving the dike system. This has to be a dike wetland because if it was over the water, the wave action would basically wash all the wetlands away. And we also are implementing a fish passage structure in the wetland because we have about 900 acres of wetland that has been cut off to fish access. And so fish can't spawn there. We've just recently put in a fish passage structure so fish can move into the wetland and move back out to the lake, and it provides 900 acres of new spawning habitat. And then we can also implement a pump there so we can manipulate water levels at different times of the year for different species. You can raise it higher for some ducks and put it down a little bit lower for some shorebirds as they're migrating through. And we can provide different kinds of habitats at different times of the year for this. And so this is our whole Erie Marsh Preserve. This is just north of Toledo. Toledo is just right down here on the bottom of the stage. And all of this is going to be potential wetland restoration within inside the dikes. And then here we have North Balmy Bay that's open to the water, and we're going to try to recreate some new islands in there to grow some submergent vegetation that again gives fish spawning habitat as well as migratory bird habitat to come in and eat those fish. I always tell my fish buddies that. One other really neat thing that I never thought of in the Great Lakes until I came here and worked with some of my wonderful staff is that we have reefs. We have spawning reefs in our Great Lakes. These aren't like coral reefs necessarily, but they basically serve some of the same purpose. So this is a map of Lake Michigan. All those dots up there in Lake Michigan are reef locations. And a reef is not just a coral reef, but it can be a pile of rocks or a chain of rocks or coral at or near the surface of the water. So in Grand Traverse Bay, we work right over here, and in the water, there are 3 reefs. What's neat about these reefs is there are the major spawning locations for lake trout and whitefish and lake herring. These are the places where those fish spawn. There's not that many. These are the places where they spawn. So this is a site of an old dock, but it's all rocky underneath, and those rocks come up and around, and they're just kind of piles there. And the fish like to spawn here because they can come on to these reefs during spawning time, lay their eggs, and their eggs kind of fall down in all that interstitial space between all the rocks. And it's kind of protected in there, and those fish can hatch and can grow. This is what that reef spot looks like there. A pile of rocks. It looks like somebody dumped them there, but that's just the way they come with all the wave action and over time. So we are trying to work on these reefs. Now the problem with these reefs is we also have an invasive crayfish called rusty crayfish, and we have another invasive fish called a round goby, which is yay big. And they also like to get in those interstitial space, and they like to go there because there's all these wonderful fish eggs there to eat. So the fish come and lay their eggs in there, and then the crayfish and the goby come on and have teeth. And so we're working on ways both to restore these reefs, because some of them have been degraded over time, they have sediment in them, and we're also keep the invasive species off these reefs. So then we can promote these native fish, the whitefish, and lake trout, and the lake herring, and have a more natural food chain, because right now in the Great Lakes, a lot of our food chain, a lot of our system is dominated by invasive species. And we want to be able to promote those because people also rely upon these species for these wonderful fish fries or smoked whitefish. Whoops, I did that. For the recreation, and also if we can promote kind of the native spawning of these fish, we have to rely less upon our hatcheries. And we can also augment the strength of these fish populations so they're less susceptible to different kinds of changes over time. So I've taken you around the state of Michigan to some wonderful places. Some the Nature Conservancy manages, some we own, some we've been involved in the protection of for a long time. And again, my contention here is that what we have in Michigan is just as wild as what you might find in any place that you encounter in your travels around the world. When I was, Melissa, who's here at staff, and I were down at Erie Marsh the fall of last year, doing a little bit of a field trip with some reporters. And this guy, anybody, this one? The peregrine falcon. We're there with these reporters, and they're learning about all of our wetland restoration activities and all the great work that people do around the Great Lakes. And this peregrine falcon comes in, and boom, it hits this coot. The coot's like a small duck. It's about that big. Kills it, grabs it, and flies right over these reporters, which is great. I couldn't have scripted this any better. So it flies with this coot, his talons, and flies right over the reporters. And I'm like, wow, because you don't get to, I'm outside of line. I've never seen that. And these reporters who really, this might have been the first time in this place, I'm like, that is so cool. And the peregrine falcon flew around, and then it made a whole other loop, around us. And I'm just like, this is incredible. And then it lands on the barn. We're here, and it lands like on the barn in the back of the room. And sits there with the coots. And starts picking at better by better. And then it starts getting space in there, and blood's dripping down on the top of our barn. And when it landed, it had flown around for like 5 minutes. And it was landing with coot, and it's like, just like you, if you would have like carried your grocery bags 5 times around the Meyer parking lot. It was really, and I'm like, do you all understand how amazing and how wild you've just seen? And I don't know where this peregrine falcon lived. It was migrating through. It might have been from anywhere in the United States. But that experience that we just happened to capture, I've never seen anything like that in my life. And I spend a lot of time outside. These reporters probably spend half the amount of time I do outside. And they got to see something, you know, Toledo's in the distance, there's smokestacks over there and power plants over there, and you can hear I-75 over here. And that happened right in front of our very eyes and rooted us, that experience in that time, in that place. And I'm never going to forget that. And I got this really great picture. If you look closely, he probably has feathers and blood on his face. That's all I have for you tonight. I'm going to show you a couple more slides because I want you, we all at the Nature Conservancy want you to be able to experience not just being inside here and listening to me talk, but learning a little bit more online. Some of you might be on Twitter. We do Twitter chats over lunchtime to kind of learn and ask questions of our experts in conservation, that you're welcome to join us. Rob, we'd love to have you too answer some questions. We want to get on there as well. We have a couple more of our lecture series here. We're going to talk about dune conservation and some fisheries conservation, some river restoration efforts. So you're welcome to come to those very much. We have our annual spring treasure hunts. This is one of our activities coming up on May 2nd. It's a great activity at our Nan Western Preserve, Grass Lake, Michigan, not too far outside of Ann Arbor. This is an excellent opportunity to bring your little ones to, your kids, grandkids, friends, anything to this, because we get out there with our conservation, our restoration staff, and they'll dig up some leapers and peepers and creepers and let the kids take a look at it. It's a great, beautiful spring wildflowers at this preserve. It's a wonderful place to go in the spring. And then we please welcome you all to visit us online and enjoy the benefits of membership. I think that's the online, and you can find us at these locations online to get a notice of any of those activities or any of those other opportunities or membership or donation. And finally, I have a pleasure of getting to do a job that I love. And it wouldn't be possible without all of you coming to listen to these things, supporting the Nature Conservancy. So finally, I just really wanted to thank you for coming tonight and thank you for your ongoing support. So I believe we do have some time for questions. I'm happy. It's about 10 to 8, so if you do have to go, please don't feel shy, but I'll be happy to take some questions. Yes, sir.
So most of your slides, you were showing how the Nature Conservancy is taking various areas back to their natural area, getting rid of the baby's breath, getting rid of the storm plant and the feds and so forth. But in the western Lake Erie basin, you're creating a natural environment with these dikes that you're putting in. So help me understand, instead of just letting that go back to what it used to be long before settlement and so forth, now you've constructed something to bring it back. What's the difference?
So the question is, in some places we have a restoration goal that might look like a natural habitat has looked like for hundreds of years. And then in other places, like I showed Western Lake Erie at our Erie Marsh Preserve, it's a very artificial goal we've set. It's a diked system. We didn't have dike systems 500 years ago. It's a dike system. And what's the difference? Why in some cases is this your outcome and in other cases that's your outcome? The first thing I would say in any conservation effort is very first important to have an outcome that you're trying, a desired future condition, we'll call it. And again, how do we set that? Well, in Western Lake Erie, especially in the coastal system, we have to understand and accept the fact that that's a heavily managed system. And we have to set a realistic goal for any restoration or management activity given the context of that system. If we were to simply remove the dikes up there and let it go to an open water system, the flows and wave action, which has been altered from what it was in the past, the energy is a lot different because a lot of areas around there are hardened structures. The shoreline is hardened concrete, and so a lot of the energy changes, and it would all come to that one place and basically wash that system right out. And you would have a lot of erosion of what's there naturally. So you'll see a lot of places like Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge, which is just around the corner on the other side of Toledo, is all diked. You'll see a lot of hunt clubs, which are privately owned, which are all diked, and you'll see parts of our Erie Marsh Preserve. But the other cool thing we want to do is I showed you where we wanted to do some of those construction island to promote some vegetation growth in the open water areas to kind of show that maybe we can do some restoration in these areas that are open to wave action. And if you get some of that vegetation in there, it might calm that down a little bit. Yes, Jan, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to clarify that we acquired that was already a dike system.
Right, yeah, that system.
So we're trying to manage it in a way to return it to a more natural state and work that.
Yeah, and that's a great point I failed to mention. That system has been diked for over half a century. And the dikes are fairly much falling apart and decrepit, but we realize they need to be there. Can we have them there in a different way and make sure we can manage water levels, make sure we can get some more fish access? I think there was a question right in here. Yes, ma'am.
Besides physically removing the buckthorn, have you found any particular plants useful in competing with it?
So the question is we can remove things like buckthorn and invasive species, but have we found anything, other plants that can act as control as well? One thing we do in these systems, there's a natural process of fire in a lot of these prairie fens. You wouldn't think they're wetlands. You wouldn't think that fire could occur in these wetlands, but sometimes of the year there's a lot of vegetation, and the moisture is such that it can carry a fire. And the fire is a natural part of these systems. So we actually have a fire ecologist on staff, and we actually were supposed to do a burn in, I'm not sure if it was a partner's preserve or our preserve this past week, but it didn't work out because of the weather conditions. So fire is a tool that we can put on the landscape. It's a naturally occurring tool, but we do it in a prescribed manner that can control some of these invasive species very easily. And so when we start to suppress fire, or when we don't have the resources to put fire on the landscape, you start to see a reinvasion of some of these invasive species. So especially in these fens, it's a lot more cost effective to put a fire. It's a lot quicker, and do it in a controlled way. These are controlled fires put on by our restoration staff. It's much more cost effective, and it also promotes the growth of a lot of the native species that are used and adapted to fire. Yes?
Yeah, follow-up question. Since fire fertilizes the area, which actually helps the growth of buckthorn, wouldn't that also have a negative impact on these species that need a nutrient poor system, such as the
Yeah, no, you would think that, but it doesn't in these systems. They're adapted. The species there are both adapted to the fire. So I mean, someplace, yeah, it can add nutrients back in but these systems are adapted to that disturbance. So the species that are there can handle that type of disturbance. The other thing about these fens is maintaining a healthy hydrological regime. Right, they're all groundwater flow, and so you'll also see problems when all the perhaps nearby agricultural areas started putting in more irrigation. That'll change the water level in the water table, and that allows more invasive species to get in there, and then that's kind of self-perpetuating because these buckthorn use a lot of water and transpire a lot of water, so it even dries them out even more. So it's that kind of perpetual cycle. So fire is actually one of the best and quickest and most efficient time and money and ecologically, and it promotes a lot of the native species. Where you do see some of those things like the fly traps and the pitcher plants, usually that's a little bit wetter, so fire will kind of skip over those places or bounce over those places. So some really aren't exposed. But when there's a lot of microtopography in these fens. There's ant hills that are this much higher and much drier than just that difference in some of the wetter areas.
So it's the hydrology.
Yeah, yep. So the hydrology will actually protect some things, or protect things that are right close to the ground and the dirt and the water. Yes, sir.
When the algal bloom
hit Lake Erie? How did it affect Lake Erie?
So the question is when the algal blooms have been on Lake Erie in the past couple of years, was there effect on the coastal wetland? We actually did not see any impact on the coastal wetland in terms of the health of it. Most of the coastal wetlands were fine. Now, I don't know, there may have been a lot of that, part of the reason Toledo's water got turned off was that the wind and wave action blew that algal bloom right over their water intake. So a lot of that is kind of idiosyncratic, or just because of the environmental conditions, or just because of the way the wind blew that day, really concentrated right over the water intake. Now, if there was, if for instance that would have pushed right into a wetland, that may have had some deleterious impacts on some fish or birds. It may have caused some fish kill or some bird kill. Those harmful algal blooms can harm pets if they're dogs or if they're playing in the water. But we did not see any impacts. Now I want to add a little bit to that question. I sound like a politician. Some of the good things about wetlands is they do actually uptake some nutrients. So if we have healthy wetlands on the coast, it can actually take to suck up some of those nutrients for the native vegetation in those wetlands. And then also, if wetlands are strategically located where an inflowing river then filters through the wetland before it hits the Great Lakes, a lot of that sediment and nutrient can be captured. That's not possible on the Maumee River because we don't have big wetlands there. But some of the smaller rivers, we've actually done our Ohio staff have done a restoration on the Toussaint River, which is near Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge, just east of Toledo, and put in a constructed wetland. So now the Toussaint River flows through that wetland before it dumps right into the Great Lakes. So some of the wetland restoration will have some benefit for things like algal blooms. That's not the big benefit. The thing we really need to do with the algal blooms is work on outputs of our agriculture, mainly our agriculture up in the Maumee River and some of our urban areas as well. Yes, sir.
Do you think we're winning? We're winning the battle.
Oh, you're getting all philosophical on me. I'm an optimist. Yeah, I'm an optimist, very much so. I don't know if I can answer your question. Yeah, I do. I also see, I'll answer this, I've also seen a change in how people think about conservation. And I showed in that mission state at the beginning, there's the people and the nature aspects of it. So I'm not going to reveal any cards here, but some people are only looking at pure nature conservation. We've lost some biodiversity. You can't, that butterfly species I showed you, I would not be surprised if that goes extinct. I hate to say that, but there's 12 populations in the world. Let's say we have a really big drought year. What if something bad happens at the one population? Anything can happen. What if a disease comes through? And then there's another camp of thinking about the processes and the functions and the uniqueness. I want to conserve uniqueness, no matter what species assemblage might be there. There are some places that will always be slightly different and slightly unique. There will always be something special there. So you can think about process and function, and even you can think about just the services that are provided to people. And so you see good healthy debate in the conservation world about what we should be conserving, what those outcomes should be. And that's a whole nother lecture. So are we winning? I think we are getting more people are getting more of those values from the Great Lakes now than they were 20 years. I think there's a much greater appreciation for the lakes. I think there's appreciation of the nature of it, and I think there's appreciation that it drives the region's economies and gives us the reason we want to live here. And I think we're doing much better than we were 40 years ago. Yeah, we're winning. Yes, ma'am.
Getting back to the dunes, I understand about 5,000-7,000 years ago, there was a good rice belt. There are these inland dunes, like MSU has been.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Are you familiar with any of this? Can you say anything to that?
I mean, Michigan has, especially when you go to the northern part of the state, and where did I go back to one of my maps or something? I mean, the whole state is, where the heck do I have a map? Sorry, just going to take you backwards through my whole presentation. The whole part of the state is really sandy. I mean, we have, especially this whole part of the Northern Upper Peninsula, it's like a big, geologically, it's like a big bowl, and it's filled with sand. And that's why some of our rivers up there, they're the most stable rivers in the world, because that big sand bowl fills with water, and those rivers are basically, the flow is the same all year round. They don't have dry and wet spells. So, and then subsequently, you have dunes inland over, that were formed over time. So they're there, and they may be, covered by vegetation, but they're below the surface. You see a lot of sand mining all throughout the state. So they are definitely there. It's just that maybe they're not as visible, and they're not as, nobody wants to go to a sand pit for vacation as opposed to go around and down the dunes. But yeah, it's a very, and again, you'll see sand, and you'll see, sand outcrops. Emerge to the surface, throughout the state. Maybe in your backyard. My in-laws have a little place down near Jones, Michigan, down here, and the hills down there, the Swiss Valley ski area. Those are all sand, and that's that's a little ways from Lake Michigan. Yes.
I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Oh no.
How does the Conservancy feel about the Michigan DNR and their cooperation or non-cooperation with preservation?
So the question is, how do we feel about the DNR's cooperation or non-cooperation with preservation? And so are you, give me a little context, you mean the biodiversity bill? Is that what you're referring back to, or?
Well, they're giving away 1,000 acres of land up in the UP for a mine.
Oh, okay.
They were trying to give away several thousand acres around Grayling for military farming range.
Yep.
They've done some things that I thought were very negative.
Which spot are you going to put me on? Obviously, the Department of Natural Resources has done amazing work for the conservation of our resources in Michigan. We would not be in the place we are without them. They're a highly valued partner. One critique that our governor has made and requested of the Department of Natural Resources is to be more outcome-based, to really understand. So the governor, who some people like, some people don't like, but he asks very business-like questions. He will ask questions of, why does the state of Michigan own 4 million acres? What are we trying to get with our ownership of 4 million acres? And we have to have those outcomes to understand why any one transaction, whether it's 1,000 acres or 1,000 acres, would or would not make sense. So I can have my personal views on certain land transactions and some I don't know about. But we are working very much with them to have very much informed outcomes, whether that means the state needs these acres of forest and they need to manage them this way to produce income streams sustainably or to produce biodiversity sustainably. So I obviously don't agree with everything the DNR does, and some particular transactions or deals or decisions might be like make no sense. But we work very closely with not just the DNR, but many departments within the state. And the main thing we want to pursue is to say, let's think about the outcomes that we're after, and then make sure that any decision, any management decision, any transaction decision gets us towards those outcomes. I think we do see a state, those departments, and I think the general tone of the state is, people get that Michigan relies upon these natural resources. I don't think anyone wants to harm them, but sometimes individual decisions don't seem to make sense within that vision. That was a very political answer. How about if I take another question or two, and then I'll be around for a little bit longer if people want to chat. Yes?
Well, I'm just curious, what was that gentleman spraying in the video, in the bench?
So that was some herbicides, I forget which one, but he's spraying an herbicide. So usually when we go with buckthorn, we'll treat it in a couple different ways. Those massive stands are either harvested by hand, or destroyed by hand, or we actually have kind of like a small, I forget the name of it, a cat, a tractor that can mow the stuff down. I forget what we call it, a hedgehog or something, I don't know. Brush hog, sorry. I'm tired, I'm sorry. So that actually can cut that much faster. And then we go back years and treat with very spot, select, focused treatment the newly emerging steps. So we're not broadcast spraying herbicide there. We'll go in and, like, if this was a stem that we saw coming up and we missed it, we would actually dab it to kill it on site. So we do use herbicides. We use ones that are approved for natural resource management, and we try to really limit the use. So we don't broadcast spray. We are very selective in our treatment. And actually, he's going out and dabbing with that. I forget which one it is, though. I forget the name right now. I think it's a glyphosate. Another question? I don't have to answer one. I'm fine. Well, again, thank you all so much for coming, and please come back to our next one, and I'll be around for a few more minutes here and outside if you'd like to chat. Thank you.